May 16, 1940. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's office, Air Ministry, Berlin. Göring set down the intelligence transcript of President Roosevelt's speech to Congress. The American president had just called for the production of 50,000 military aircraft per year. Göring laughed, not a polite chuckle, a genuine, belly-deep laugh that echoed through his ornate office. 50,000 planes? He said to his chief of Luftwaffe intelligence. Die Amerikaner machen Kühlschränke und Rasierapparat. The Americans make refrigerators and razors. He lit a cigar and continued, they don't know how to make weapons. This is Roosevelt's propaganda. Fantasy numbers meant to frighten us into peace negotiations. His intelligence chief agreed. Their analysis concluded that American estimates were inflated by a factor of 3 to 5 for propaganda purposes. Göring filed the report and forgot about it. He shouldn't have. By 1944, America wasn't building 50,000 aircraft per year. They were building 96,018, one complete aircraft rolling off American assembly lines every 5.5 minutes, every single minute of every single day, for an entire year. This is the story of how Hermann Göring's laughter turned to silence, how American industry didn't just meet Roosevelt's impossible goal, they doubled it, and how German pilots looked up at skies that belonged entirely to American production. To understand Göring's confidence in May 1940, you need to understand what he was seeing from his perspective. Germany had just conquered Poland in 28 days, Norway in 62 days, Denmark in 6 hours, the Netherlands in 5 days, Belgium in 18 days. France, the great military power of Europe, had fallen in just 6 weeks. The Luftwaffe had been decisive in every campaign. German aircraft production was humming. In 1939, Germany had produced 8,295 military aircraft. In 1940, production would reach 10,247. Göring had every reason to believe German industry was the most efficient in the world. Then Roosevelt made his speech on May 16, 1940, calling for 50,000 planes per year. To put that in perspective, in 1939, the entire American aircraft industry had produced 5,856 military aircraft. Roosevelt was calling for an increase of nearly 10 times that output. Göring's intelligence assessment was straightforward and, from his perspective, logical. The United States currently produces approximately 6,000 military aircraft annually. Their industry is optimized for civilian production, automobiles, appliances, commercial goods. Converting to military production requires complete factory retooling, workforce retraining, and supply chain restructuring. Even under the most favorable conditions, American production might reach 15,000 to 20,000 military aircraft per year by 1943. Claims of 50,000 annual production are propaganda intended to intimidate the Axis powers. The report concluded, American threats of massive production should be dismissed as psychological warfare. The American character is unsuited to the discipline required for total war production. Göring circulated this assessment to Hitler and the German High Command. Everyone agreed, America was bluffing. But something Göring didn't understand was already happening in America. In 1940, President Roosevelt appointed William S. Kudo, then former president of General Motors, to head the Office of Production Management. Knudsen had one qualification that mattered. He understood mass production. And he understood something Göring didn't. American industry wasn't optimized for civilian goods instead of military goods. American industry was optimized for volume, for scale, for mass production of complex machinery. In Germany, the Messerschmitt Bf 209 was built by skilled craftsmen using semi-custom methods. Tolerances were tight, parts were hand-fitted, quality was supreme. In America, Ford was building Model T automobiles using interchangeable parts and assembly line methods. Every part had to fit every vehicle. Tolerances were standardized, volume was supreme. Göring saw this as American inferiority. Knudsen saw it as American advantage. In 1940, American factories produced 12,804 military aircraft. Göring noted the increase from 1939 but dismissed it, still far below German production. and well below their promised 50,000. What he didn't see was the infrastructure being built, the new factories being constructed, the workforce being trained, the supply chains being established. While Germany was invading the Soviet Union, believing the war would be over by winter, America was building. The Willow Run factory near Detroit broke ground in April 1941. Designed to build B-24 Liberator bombers, it would become the largest factory building under one roof in the world, 3.5 million square feet, more than 67 acres under a single roof. Charles Lindbergh toured the facility and declared it impossible. 1 mile of assembly line? Building bombers like automobiles? It can't be done, he said. Henry Ford replied, "Watch us." In Long Beach, California, Douglas Aircraft expanded its facilities to build the C-47 transport. In Wichita, Kansas, Boeing built a new plant for B-29 development. In Marietta, Georgia, Bell Aircraft constructed a factory from farmland, and this was before Pearl Harbor. December 7, 1941, changed everything. Roosevelt's 50,000 planes per year went from target to mandate. The goal became as many as humanly possible. In 1941, American production reached 19,433 military aircraft. Göring's intelligence updated their assessment. American production increasing but constrained by industrial conversion challenges and workforce shortages. Maximum sustainable production estimated at 25,000, 30,000 annually. They were still drastically underestimating. What German intelligence didn't grasp was the scale of American mobilization. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter wasn't propaganda, it was reality. At peak production, women comprised 65% of the aviation workforce. Factories operated 24/7 in 3 8-hour shifts. The lights never went off. The federal government invested billions in factory construction under the Defense Plant Corporation. If private industry wouldn't build a factory fast enough, the government built it and leased it to manufacturers. By the end of 1942, the results were undeniable. American aircraft production in 1942, 47,836 military aircraft. Roosevelt's impossible goal of 50,000 per year was within reach after just 2 years of ramping up. Göring stopped laughing. In a November 1942 conference with Hitler, Göring admitted, "The Americans are producing more aircraft than we anticipated. However, quantity does not equal quality. Our pilots report, American aircraft are inferior in performance to German types." This was Göring's new argument. Sure, America could build planes, but they were inferior planes. He was about to learn the difference between American production philosophy and German production philosophy. Germany built the Focke-Wulf W-100 superb fighter, technologically advanced, beautifully engineered. Production in 1942, approximately 180-50 aircraft. America built the P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavy fighter, brutally simple, over-engineered for survival. Production in 1942, 354 aircraft delivered, production ramping up. By 1944, Germany would produce about 7,500 VW-190s. By 1944, America would produce 14,031 P-47s. And the P-47 was just one of several American fighter types in mass production. The year American industrial might fully awakened. At Willow Run, Ford's B-24 Liberator production line reached full capacity. The facility employed 42,000 workers building the most complex military aircraft in the world. A B-24 Liberator contained approximately 1,550,000 parts, 500,000 rivets, 30,000 separate operations in its construction. In traditional manufacturing, building one B-24 took thousands of man-hours spread over weeks or months. At Willow Run, at peak efficiency, a complete B-24 rolled off the line every 63 minutes, not every hour, every 63 minutes. Let that sink in. One complete 4-engine heavy bomber, weighing 36,000 pounds empty, with a wingspan longer than the distance the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk, built from 1.5 million parts, emerging from the factory every single hour. German intelligence officers who reviewed captured American production reports initially refused to believe them. One Abwehr analysis from early 1943 stated, "Reported American production figures must be inflated for morale purposes. Physical production of claimed quantities is thermodynamically impossible given known aluminum supplies and workforce constraints." They thought America was lying about its own production numbers. America wasn't lying. America was just getting started. 1943. American aircraft production, 85,898 military aircraft. That's 235 aircraft per day. Every single day. For 365 days. 10 aircraft every hour. 1 aircraft every 6 minutes. Göring's response, documented in a March 1943 meeting, "We cannot match American production volume. We must focus on quality and pilot skill. One German pilot is worth 5 American pilots." He was falling back on the last argument. Superior German quality would overcome American quantity. But by mid-1943, that argument was falling apart too. American pilots arriving in Europe had 400-plus hours of flight training. German pilots were entering combat with 120 hours due to fuel and aircraft shortages for training. American aircraft, while perhaps less technically refined than German designs, were proving brutally effective in combat. The P-47 could absorb damage that would destroy 3 Messerschmitts. The B-17 could continue flying with engines shot off. And most importantly, when Germany lost an aircraft, it was gone. When America lost an aircraft, 3 more arrived from across the Atlantic to replace it. Which brings us to 1944, the year that proved Göring hadn't just underestimated American production, he had fundamentally misunderstood American industrial capacity. 1944, American aircraft production, 96,038 military aircraft. Let me break that down, 264 aircraft per day, 11 aircraft per hour. 1 complete military aircraft every 5.5 minutes for 365 consecutive days. To put this in perspective, in 1944 alone, the United States produced more military aircraft than Germany produced during the entire war. Germany's total aircraft production, 1939 to 1945, approximately 119,000 aircraft. America in just 1944, 96,018 aircraft. The numbers by manufacturer in 1944, North American Aviation, 19,547 aircraft, P-51 Mustangs, B-25, Mitchells, Douglas, 13,819 aircraft, C-47 transports, A-20 attack bombers, CEP-D dive bombers, Consolidated, Convair, 9,614 aircraft, B-24 Liberators, PBY Catalinas, Boeing, 7,035 aircraft, B-17, Flying Fortresses, B-29, Super Fortresses, Republic, 7,081 aircraft, P-47. Thunderbolts, Curtiss, 7,025 aircraft, P-40, Warhawks, C-46 Commandos, and those are just the top manufacturers. Dozens of other companies contributed. Germany was fighting a nation that had transformed its entire industrial base into a military production juggernaut. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, was one of the few German leaders who understood the full horror of what Germany faced. In his post-war memoirs, Speer wrote about a meeting in late 1944 where production figures from all sides were finally compiled and honestly assessed. When the numbers were presented, the room fell silent. Speer described the realization: the Allies were outproducing Germany in every category, but the gap in aircraft was almost incomprehensible. German aircraft production in 1944, approximately 40,000 aircraft, an impressive number and Germany's highest production year. American production in 1944, 96,018 aircraft, plus British production, approximately 26,000 aircraft, plus Soviet production, approximately 40,000 aircraft. Combined Allied aircraft production in 1944, over 160,000 aircraft. Germany, 40,000. The ratio was 4-1, and that was Germany's best year. But the numbers only told part of the story. Germany's 40,000 aircraft in 1944 represented total mobilization, every factory running at maximum capacity, synthetic fuel production at its peak, forced labor and concentration camp prisoners building components, and Germany still only managed 40,000. America's 96,031 aircraft represented about 40% of American industrial capacity. The U.S. was simultaneously building 50,000 tanks, producing 2 million trucks, launching hundreds of ships, manufacturing millions of small arms, and still maintaining robust civilian production. American factories were building military aircraft and civilian goods. Germany had converted everything to military production and still couldn't keep pace. May 1940, 50,000 planes, American propaganda. January 1942, American production is increasing but will peak around 25,000, 30,000 annually. June 1943, we cannot match their production volume, but our quality advantage remains decisive. January 1944. The Americans are overwhelming us with numbers. We must develop jet aircraft to regain superiority. September 1944. I take full responsibility for underestimating American industrial capacity. By late 1944, Göring had effectively withdrawn from active leadership. The Luftwaffe was being commanded by subordinates, while Göring retreated to his estates, increasingly irrelevant. Hauptmann Heinz Nocke wrote in his combat diary, December 1944, "We faced over 1,000 American bombers with perhaps 800 escort fighters. We managed to scramble 80 fighters from 3 airfields. We shot down 12 bombers at the cost of 23 of our own aircraft. They replaced their losses by tomorrow. We have no replacement aircraft and 5 of our pilots are dead. This is not a battle we can win through courage or skill. This is mathematics, and the mathematics say we lose." Another Luftwaffe pilot, whose account was recorded in post-war interviews, remembered, "Every morning we would count how many fighters we had operational, maybe 30, maybe 40 if we were lucky. We would take off and see the American formations, hundreds of bombers, hundreds of fighters. Where did they all come from? We would shoot down 20, 30 aircraft. Victories we would have celebrated in 1940. But the next day, there were still hundreds more. It was like fighting the ocean. You could sink 1,000 drops of water, but the ocean remained." German pilots knew that every aircraft they shot down would be replaced, probably within a week. They knew that every aircraft they lost was gone forever, maybe replaced in a month, maybe never replaced. They knew that their fuel was limited, while American aircraft seemed to have unlimited fuel. They knew that American pilots were arriving with better training, while German replacement pilots had barely soloed. They knew they were fighting American production. And you can't shoot down a factory. What allowed America to achieve production numbers that Germans thought physically impossible? It wasn't just size. It wasn't just resources. It was a fundamentally different approach to manufacturing. Every P-51 wing built in California would fit every P-51 fuselage built in Texas. Parts were machined to precise tolerances that allowed complete interchangeability. German aircraft often required hand-fitting of components. Each aircraft was slightly unique. This maximized quality but minimized production speed. American aircraft treated every unit as identical. This allowed parallel production of components at multiple facilities. The fuselage was built at Republic's Farmingdale, New York facility. The wings were built at Republic's Evansville, Indiana facility. The engines, Pratt & Whitney R-2800s, were built in Connecticut and Kansas. The propellers were built by Curtiss in multiple locations. All components shipped to final assembly where they fit together perfectly without modification. This allowed Republic to scale production rapidly. When demand increased, they didn't need to build one bigger factory. They built multiple component factories and expanded final assembly. American manufacturers controlled or had guaranteed access to every level of supply chain. Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America, expanded capacity specifically for aircraft production. By 1943, U.S. aluminum production was 920,000 tons annually, 3 times 1939 levels. Germany's aluminum production peaked at 240,000 tons annually and declined as Allied bombing intensified. American aircraft manufacturers never worried about aluminum shortages. German manufacturers constantly worked around aluminum constraints. By 1944, American aircraft factories employed over 2.1 million workers. Germany's entire aircraft industry employed approximately 450,000 workers, plus forced labor, which was less productive. The American workforce was well-fed, well-paid, and motivated by patriotism and profit. American aircraft workers earned good wages with overtime pay. They had access to canteens, childcare, and healthcare. German aircraft workers, especially forced laborers, were undernourished, unpaid, or poorly paid, and working under threat. Sabotage was common. Quality suffered. American productivity per worker was roughly 3.5 times higher than German productivity per worker. American aircraft companies invested heavily in training programs. Most workers received 100–200 hours of specific job training before starting production work. Experienced workers were rotated to training roles. Best practices were documented and shared across factories. Germany increasingly relied on unskilled forced labor with minimal training. Quality control became problematic as skilled workers were drafted into military service. American factories used the most advanced machine tools in the world. Riveting, standardized jigs and fixtures, precision measurement instruments. Republic Aviation's P-47 production line used over 1,500 custom-designed tools and fixtures. Each fixture ensured identical part positioning, reducing variation and increasing speed. German factories had excellent craftsmen but less automation. The Fu-190 production involved more handwork, which limited production scaling. Interestingly, despite the focus on volume, American aircraft were generally reliable and well-built. Wartime studies showed American aircraft had lower maintenance requirements and longer service lives than equivalent German types. The B-17 Flying Fortress earned its name not through marketing, but through demonstrated ability to survive damage and keep flying. The P-47 Thunderbolt routinely returned from missions with damage that would have destroyed any German fighter. American production philosophy: build it tough enough that it works consistently under combat conditions, then build thousands of them. German production philosophy: build it to the highest technical standards, except that this limits quantities. By 1944, the American philosophy had proven superior for total war. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. The final aircraft production figures for World War II, United States, 300,317 military aircraft, 1940–1945. Soviet Union, approximately 157,000 military aircraft. United Kingdom, approximately 101,000 military aircraft. Total Allied production, approximately 588,000 military aircraft. Germany, approximately 119,000 military aircraft, 1939–1945. Japan, approximately 76,000 military aircraft, 1941–1945. Total Axis production, approximately 195,000 military aircraft. The Allies built 3 aircraft for every 1 Axis aircraft. And Allied aircraft were, on average, larger, more complex, and more capable. At the Nuremberg trials, Hermann Göring was questioned about his May 1940 dismissal of American production capacity. The prosecutor asked, Reichsmarschall Göring, in May 1940, you stated that American claims of 50,000 annual aircraft production were impossible. By 1944, America was producing 96,038 aircraft annually. How do you explain this intelligence failure? Göring's response, recorded in trial transcripts: I underestimated the American capacity for industrial organization. Germany's strength lay in technical excellence and individual craftsmanship. America's strength lay in mass production and industrial scale. In a long war, their strength proved decisive. I was wrong. This was one of the few times during the trial that Göring admitted a clear mistake. Albert Speer was more specific in his analysis. In his memoir, Inside the Third Reich, he wrote, "German industry was organized for precision and quality. American industry was organized for volume and logistics. We thought quality would triumph over quantity. We were wrong because we failed to understand that past a certain point, quantity becomes its own quality. When the enemy can afford to lose 3 aircraft for every one you lose, and still have more aircraft than you, superior individual quality becomes irrelevant." Speer continued, "Roosevelt's call for 50,000 aircraft per year seemed absurd to us in 1940. By 1944, we would have been grateful if that was all the Americans could build. Instead, they nearly doubled that figure. And they did it while simultaneously building the world's largest navy and army. This was industrial capacity we simply could not comprehend. After the war, American aircraft factories converted back to civilian production with remarkable speed. Willow Run, which built B-24 bombers, began building civilian automobiles by 1946. Boeing, which built B-17s and B-29s, transitioned to civilian airliners. The production infrastructure remained, the skilled workforce remained, the organizational knowledge remained. When Boeing introduced the 707 jetliner in 1958, they used production techniques developed during the war. The 747, 777, and modern airliners are descendants of wartime mass production methods. Today, Boeing and Airbus together produce approximately 500 commercial aircraft per year. This level of production, which seems remarkable, is just 1.6% of what American aircraft factories achieved in 1944. At the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, a restored B-17 Flying Fortress sits in the World War II aviation exhibition. A small placard notes, over 12,731 B-17s were built during World War II. At peak production in 1944, Boeing, Douglas, and Vega together produced these complex aircraft at a rate of approximately 1 per hour. Visitors often pause and reread that statistic, 1 per hour, for 4-engine heavy bombers. The numbers still seem impossible, until you remember they're real. May 16, 1940, Hermann Göring laughs at Roosevelt's promise of 50,000 planes per year. "The Americans make refrigerators and razors," he said, "not weapons." He was right about one thing. Americans did make refrigerators and razors. But what Göring didn't understand was that a nation that could produce 30 million refrigerators per year could absolutely produce 100,000 aircraft per year. Because mass production is mass production, the skills transfer, the methods transfer, the organizational capacity transfers. Americans didn't learn how to build aircraft from aircraft companies. American aircraft companies learned how to build aircraft from American automobile companies, appliance manufacturers, and industrial producers. Henry Ford didn't visit Willow Run to learn how to build aircraft. Willow Run was built because Ford already knew how to mass-produce complex machinery. They just applied those methods to aircraft instead of cars. Hermann Göring promised 50,000 planes per year was impossible. America built 96,018 in 1944 alone, and built 300 D-17 during the entire war, and won. The laughter stopped. The production continued.